Hello, welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan.
The guru of all things. We do post every week, so hit subscribe if you want to hear our continuing adventures amongst the rare plants and gardens of the world.
Yes.
But Mr. Ryan, once again, we're in the veggie patch.
Yeah, which is a bit scary. But anyhow, we're only in the vegetable patch because of a plant that I sort of planted here to trial out in a way. And it's right above my head.
Ta-da, it's like a halo.
Yes.
A saintly halo. And what is it?
It's a dahlia. Now, it's a sort of semi-tree dahlia.
I was going to say, it's a short tree dahlia.
Yes.
Or a large regular dahlia.
Yeah, there is some dispute over which group of dahlias it actually belongs in.
Is there? Who's disputing?
Well, the authorities that be. It's generally classed horticulturally as a tree dahlia, but apparently genetically it's more closely aligned to the classic dahlia, even though it has more a tree dahlia type habit. It's brand new. It was only discovered a decade or two back.
And is this your first season with it?
This is my first season with it. It's called Dahlia campanulata, meaning bell-shaped, which it sort of is.
So the flowers hang down, as we can see.
And it's got possibly one of the biggest flowers of any wild dahlia. So it's got very, very large flowers. They're almost white. They've just got the faintest lavender blush to it.
They're beautiful.
And then you've got, if you look indoors, you see that it's got a beautiful burgundy stain around the centre of the flower.
Stunning.
And it's just absolutely beautiful.
It really is. So let's do T's and C's. Firstly, are all dahlias Mexican?
They're all Central American, yes.
So the whole
genus
continent
comes from that part of the world, so into sort of northern parts of South America, up through Mexico. I don't think they extend into the US though, so I don't think they get quite that far. It was found in Mexico, up in the mountains at around about 2,000 metres or 6,000 feet for those who work in that sort of thing. It comes from the sort of mist forests or fog forests of Mexico.
The mists of Mexico, well, I'm there.
It comes from a climate that is cool but not cold, so it rarely if ever gets frost. It's always moist during the growing season, so it has summer moisture. But really as a garden plant, so far, I'm finding that I can grow this in much the same way as I'd grow most other dahlias.
So for those of you in a climate that is colder, such as Britain and North America, you'd lift it.
Yep, lift the tubers. Having said that, I haven't lifted the tubers of this yet.
Because it's the first year.
It's the first year.
What if it dies a painful death?
It won't do that.
Then you'll be sorry.
Yeah, well, I would. But nonetheless, having done a little research, mainly for this particular video, apparently it can get tubers up to 1.5 foot long, which is... Yeah, it's sort of about 40 centimetres long, which is frightening.
Wow.
To lift it out of the ground, if I've got tubers that big underneath, it's going to be quite a hair-raising sort of event. But
do you reckon you could grow it in a large tub though?
I think it would be perfectly happy in a really big tub. I think it's probably better in the ground though. The things you've got to remember about it, yes, they need water in the summer, as most tree dahlias and in fact other dahlias need. You'll need to cut it down in the winter when it's finished flowering. It's sort of autumn, early winter flowering. The frost will knock it down here if we get a heavy frost. We haven't had one yet, so that will put pay to it for the rest of the season. And it should be able to be grown from winter canes like the other tree dahlias, which I'm going to try this year. And also you could grow it from cuttings from new growth coming up in the spring as well. So I'm hoping to be able to propagate it up in quantity eventually.
So that's the same propagation as a regular dahlia?
Basically the same as a regular dahlia. You can split the clumps of tubers as long as you make sure you get a piece of stem with each tuber. If you break a tuber off, that tuber won't grow. And of course...
right. I see what you mean.
So you need to have a piece of the stem with each tuber. So if I've only got one stem, there'll be a handful of tubers underneath it, and I'll have to slice the stem down through the centre, attached to a tuber.
Yowza, okay. Would you have to fertilise this heavily? I mean, I always think tree dahlias must put so much energy into all of this growth for such a short period. They must require huge amounts of energy.
Well, you'd think so, but I don't remember ever going out of my way to feed any of my tree dahlias. And I guess the other thing we need to keep in mind, and it's something people need to be aware of, we're going to show you one of the slightly more common tree dahlias in a moment.
Must we say common? It's perhaps more available.
More available, that could be a good way of putting it. The one thing you do have to do with tree dahlias, whether they be the rare campanulata or the more commonly grown excelsa or the very commonly grown imperialis, which is the really common one, they are all prone to wind damage. So You need a sheltered site, and you may need to do a bit of staking to make sure they don't topple over just as they're about to come into flower, which would be frightening.
Corners of gardens or corners of fencing or something, or perhaps next to a tree. So they need full sun though.
They like a fair bit of sun, although campanulata, funnily enough, because of its habitat, will cope with semi-shade all right. It doesn't need as much sun as some of the others do.
And would you try and propagate them from seed, or is that
You can grow most dahlias from seed, and no, it's not too much effort. The issue you've got is that dahlias can be quite promiscuous, and because I've got Dahlia excelsa in another part of the garden...
They've been having fun times at the weekend.
And this one here, I couldn't promise that my seedlings were going to be pure campanulata. And apparently already there are dahlias lurking around under the name of campanulata that in fact aren't the true species. They're actually hybrids. Of hybrid origin. It's worth looking for the true species, and the true species should have that wonderful dark centre in it. Some of its hybrids seem to have lost that, so they're just a straight pinky colour.
Which kind of loses the point. One other question though, so about height, the height comparison, because you were saying there's this controversy as to whether it's a dahlia or a tree dahlia.
Yeah.
So how high would this grow in comparison to the more classic tree dahlia?
All right, well the classical tree dahlias, imperialis and excelsa, will get up to, in the old measurements, around about the 15 feet or more.
See, I find that incredible for an annual plant. Well, it's not an annual, but you know, it grows annually from a tuber, but that amount of growth, it's extraordinary, don't you think?
In fact, that's part of the fun of growing any of these. It's not, I mean, the flowering is fantastic, but it's to watch that incredible eruption of biomass out of the ground in such a short time. It's very exciting.
Sorry, the height comparison then?
Yes, so around about 15 feet is about the height you expect off the commoner ones. This particular one rarely grows much above 8 feet. So,
so I'm 6 feet and...
Yes, it's a couple of feet above you, nearly, and that's in one season. So this has been a 1 year plant, so maybe next year it'll be a bit bigger if I don't rip it out of the ground and start propagating from it.
Well, maybe we should go and look at the not common but more available version.
Yes, let's go and do that.
Off we go. It's a bit windy, Mr. Ryan. I must apologise for any wind in the willows from our microphones. So what is this one?
Well, this is what I got as Dahlia excelsa. Now, there is some dispute over this potentially. It could be tenuissima. But anyhow, I grow it as Dahlia excelsa. It's a little more commonly available than the one we've just been speaking about, campanulata.
There's something very spiky here. What is that?
It's an artichoke thistle, sorry. Great foliage though. Now, this one I like in my garden because imperialis, the really common tree dahlia, tends not to flower for me very often because it wants to come out really late in the season. The frost generally knocks it down.
So let's talk about that then. So seasonality. They are generally autumn flowerers, but
autumn, early winter flowering.
Right. This one, frost is the killer.
And well, frost knocks them down to the ground as soon as they've finished their cycle, or beforehand sometimes. So I've given up on imperialis. This one always flowers a few weeks earlier for me, so it normally comes out well before the frosts knock it off, and it has this very pretty clear, deep mauve flower on it, and it's a charming plant.
It really is. And this one, I will show, is a massive specimen.
Yeah, it's huge. It's been in the ground here for quite some years, and I generally propagate it just from cane cuttings in the winter if I want another plant of it. So I leave it undisturbed in the garden, which is what I'm hoping I'll eventually be able to do with campanulata as well. I'd like to have a big clump of it, obviously. You know, just obtaining something is one thing. Yes.
So let's talk about your obsession with it. How did you find it? So this is an interesting point for those of us, well, particularly in Australia, but in environments where it's not easy to import plants. How did you find it?
Well, I'd seen it on Facebook feeds, and I kept saying to everybody on the Facebook feed, "Where's my plant?" You know, throwing those things out there.
Don't you know who I am?
Yeah, that's right.
I need this.
Yeah, and funnily enough, a collector in South Australia had raised it and had it, and I'm assuming from overseas seed. An intermediary of mine rang me one day and said, "This guy I know in Adelaide is offering you a plant of Dahlia campanulata." And when I picked myself up off the ground, I said, "Grab it right now."
It's like a drug deal in Colombia.
It is sort of. And so anyhow, so this plant came back and it was just a tiny wee little thing. And I looked at it and thought, are you campanulata? You know, you always have that little fear when it first happens. But campanulata has grooved stems, which actually we might show the grooved stem. So I very quickly realised I probably had the fair dinkum plant. And of course, I flowered it last year in a pot, but quite small. And so this is the first year I've actually had it out out in the ground where it's showing its proper
Right, it looks
features.
stunning. And so this one is more readily available, and again, similar climatic requirements,
Yeah.
so full sun, moisture during its growing period,
and shelter from the winds a bit because
Shelter
it's
from the
inclined
winds.
to snap.
and the frost will knock it down. So if you're in a climate with harsh frosts, you'd want to grow it in tubs in a conservatory.
Yes, if you're going to keep it in flower, that's for certain. I mean, you can grow the plant in the ground, but like Imperialis in my own garden, it will get hit to the ground as the flower buds are coming on it instead of afterwards, which
There
is
we go.
always a bit of a sort of disappointment.
It is, it is. Well, I've always loved tree dahlias, and for me, it's that burst of energy that's required to grow a plant that is massive. So, comparisonly, the height of this.
This will get up to about 15 feet or so. And may I actually throw in a little bit of trivia? Something
In
just
one
something
season, 15 feet.
Yeah.
God, that's extraordinary. Anyway, yes, trivia.
Dahlia Imperialis and this one were used by the Aztecs as water pipes because they've got hollow stems. So they just had to break the membrane at the node. So they'd poke something down it, and they actually used it to transfer water around their villages and settlements. So they were water pipe plants.
How interesting. Now, dahlias obviously came to Europe with the European conquest of South America. Was there a similar kind of dahlia mania as there was tulip mania?
There was, and in fact when dahlias were first imported, they were imported as a potential new edible crop.
Ah, like the potato.
Yes, like the potato.
A
They
tuber.
realised that the tubers didn't have a particularly attractive flavour, and so they've never sort of taken off as an
Gourmet
edible
food
plant.
stuff.
Yes.
South American superfood.
Yeah, well, exactly. But they very quickly realised that the flowers were fantastic. They were very long lasting as cut flowers. They flowered in the late part of the year.
That was my other question. Cut flowers, both types fine.
Yeah, no reason why they couldn't be used as cut flowers.
Yep.
And of course, dahlias, because they're genetically very unstable, particularly the first ones that came in,
Like the
they
best of us.
very quickly produced a whole pile of hybrids. And of course, everybody wanted the new one, so the nursery people got to work. And there's literally thousands of names now of dahlia cultivars, even though they only used a handful of species to produce all of those different cultivars out there.
Right.
None of the tree dahlias came into the early breeding programs.
So they hadn't been found by that
Well,
point.
I don't know whether they've been found or whether they just weren't seen as suitable garden plants, and so they just sort of languish.
Languish
as
in the
things
misty
do.
mountains of the Andes.
Yeah, all those dahlias that are out there, and there are masses of them,
Come from a very limited genetic stock.
yeah, but dahlias just keep throwing all sorts of interesting things. Even been one bred named after me.
Dahlia Stephen Ryan?
Yes.
Describe Dahlia Stephen
All
Ryan.
right, I will describe
Should
it.
I try first? No, I won't.
No, I wouldn't
We'll
go
have
there.
to bleep it
But
out.
I think I can describe it perfectly
Go on.
well. It's simple, single, virginal white, self-supporting, and slightly perfumed. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so
that
there
is
you go.
hilarious.
Yeah.
How did you get a dahlia named up? Not that you shouldn't, because, you know,
Yes.
you deserve such honours.
Because the person who bred the dahlia, I saw the plant and said I would like a tuber of that dahlia when you have spares.
Yeah.
Decided he would not only give me a tuber of the plant, he would also name it
after
me.
you.
Yeah, so there you
Wow.
go. So there is a Dahlia Stephen Ryan out there, and I know our friend from the middle-sized garden, Alexandra,
Yes.
has actually got Dahlia Stephen Ryan in her own garden in England.
She has, and we'll link our video with Alexandra above. Well, Mr. Ryan, thank you for our tiptoe through not the tulips, the dahlia bed.
Yeah, especially tiptoeing through tree dahlias is quite a challenge.
I've always loved them. They are amazing things, and I'm glad to know that they're fairly easy to grow in tubs.
Yes, they are, as long as the tub is big enough and as long as you tie it back to the wall so they don't fall over.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we post every week. If this has been of interest to you, do subscribe, because we will be following other adventures of very unusual plants. Mr. Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Lucas, for coming and enjoying my tree dahlias.
And we'll see you next week.
Fantastic.